why you and your colleagues were interested in this particular topic.
Well, I suppose the reason for our interest is that I've spent most of my career researching how we can help children to thrive, how we can help them to develop well, and so they're happy, healthy and productive adults. And as I became more and more aware of climate change and the pervasive impacts it's going to have on the next generation, I started to really be concerned about how our research is actually going to be relevant, if it is going to be relevant for the next generation. I'm very aware that most children are aware about climate change, and we don't really know how that's impacting on their development.
What did you look at in particular with this study?
What I've been doing in the work that I've been doing in this is thinking quite a lot about parents and how parents are responding. We became very aware that parents are very uncertain about how to respond to their children about climate change. We know from many other surveys that most children know about climate change, and they're really worried about it, how it will impact on their future. But they don't always feel very comfortable about talking to their parents or to other people about it. And parents aren't quite sure about how they should go about it. So they ask us questions like, at what age should I start talking to my children about climate change? How do I know if my child is ready to hear about climate change?
What is fueling that uncertainty amongst parents?
I think parents, a lot of parents, certainly in Australia, but I think around the world, are feeling very anxious about how their children are going to fare, given the impact that climate change is having on the world and will continue to have on the world. So they've got their own anxieties about it, but they don't want to burden their children with those anxieties, but on the other hand they want to support their children and prepare their children to be able to cope and adjust to the sorts of changes that they're going to see in their lifetimes.
And why are children having a difficult time with that conversation?
I think children often want to protect their parents too. They don't want to burden their parents, or it might just be they don't know how to start the conversation, or it might be that they haven't actually thought about it at all. But in our experience, most kids do know about it and they are worried about it, but just feel uncomfortable about starting those conversations.
What kind of fears have the kids expressed that you've worked with?
Well, it's a range of feelings that children are expressing. They're showing certainly a lot of distress at what they see happening to the natural environment, the beloved places that are getting damaged through climate change. Like in Australia, we are watching the bleaching of our Great Barrier Reef, which is a very beloved place to Australians, and that is being bleached and it's unlikely to recover because it'll need 15 years of cool water for the reef to recover, and it's unlikely we'll get those 15 years. So it's that sort of grief that they express. They also are really worried about what it's going to be like if they're going to be experiencing the extreme weather events that they see are happening more and more often and more disastrously around the world. For some it might be hurricanes, for others it might be wildfires. For others it might be, if they're living close to the sea, they might be worried about sea level rising and if their house might be flooded. For others it might be drought. So in Australia we've had large areas that have been badly affected by drought, and I know the same is here in the US as well. So they're concerned about, they might be living through a drought with their family where they're having to be very careful with water, or if they're on farms they're having to sell their animals. And then they get to realise that this actually might become more frequent and worse in the future, and they get very concerned about that.
What kind of long-lasting impact do these concerns have on a child's mental health?
I think it depends on how they're supported to deal with those concerns. If they're able to share them, to have them validated, to have their parents or others saying, well, yes, it's reasonable to be feeling scared. I sometimes feel scared too. But there are things that we can do about this. There have been other big problems in the world that we have solved. We have got rid of slavery. We have brought in the vote for women. We have got civil rights. There are big problems that we have resolved in the past. And, you and I together, there are things that we can do So one of the things we say is one of the best antidotes to anxiety is taking action on the source of that anxiety. So helping children to do something to address climate change is actually really good for their psychological well-being.
With the climate change strikes that we've seen all over the world, is that one way that having children voice their concerns?
I think those school strikes for climate action have been actually very important for a lot of children. They've been able to get together, to feel strength in numbers, that all of them are together, feeling that their voices are being heard by the politicians, by the decision makers, by the opinion leaders. And I think, they're expressing a lot of anger about our generation for having created this terrible problem, but at the same time they're feeling a bit empowered and as if maybe their voices will be heard and will get the action that we need to preserve the planet that they need for their future. But I think they also have learnt, I've been so impressed with these kids, they've learnt so much. One of the signs that one of the students in Australia had up was saying activism is learning, because some people were saying you should be staying at school and learning your reading, writing and arithmetic and your STEM skills and things. And they said activism is learning, and in fact if you see the skills they have learned through this, it's extraordinary. They've learned so much organisational skills, they organise these themselves, they learned how to negotiate with the police and let them know about what was going to be happening and have the police being, responsible and more sort of on side. They've learned how to use the social media. They've gone to visit politicians after the strike and had been able to speak with their local members of parliament. They've learned so much about how to become a citizen in their future lives. I think it's been, as well as lots of other life skills, and they've shown determination and persistence, all the things we want for our children, they've really showed in spades.
At what age should parents start the discussion?
I think the conversations can start early, but in different ways with children of different ages. So kids quite often, they notice things that their parents are doing. Like, how come you're taking the train today instead of driving the car? And the parent can say, well, I'm taking public transport because that doesn't make so much carbon dioxide and that's bad for our planet. So I'm working to make sure the planet is a bit safer for you. And that's one way of starting it. And then you can follow the children's lead, but with simple explanations. A really important thing with really young children is to help build their love of nature and their feeling being part of nature, recognising that we are interdependent with the natural environment. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of parents find as something very nice to do with kids, is to go out and enjoy their environment and then to think about how can we make sure we can keep this park as beautiful as it is, and shall we plant some trees, shall we get involved in doing some community gardening, shall we do things like that. And so kids really feel like the environment is something that they can relate to and know about, and they know how to protect and that they want to protect.
Was there one particular study that was published recently that addresses the mental health aspect for kids?
We have written reviews of the literature on mental health impacts. So there's quite strong evidence about the mental health impacts on children who've actually experienced an extreme weather event like Hurricane Katrina, or been through a wildfire, or through a flood and so on. And so we have quite good data there that shows that children who've directly experienced those things do have higher rates of post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. They also have higher rates of anxiety and depression disorders, and sleeping problems, and even some cognitive and learning problems as a result of that very stressful experience that they've been through. And of course with kids, and thinking into the future, the likelihood is that they'll experience these things more than once. And we know that cumulative stress is actually very bad for children's well-being and development. It's one of our concerns.
Is there one message you would want to get out to our viewers who are seeing this about kids and their mental health and concerns about climate change?
Well, I suppose my message would be that the climate change is happening, and it's something we do. The kids know it's happening, and we really do need to address it. We need to do what we can to stop the increase in the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but we also have to think about how we can support our children who are going to be going through a lot of changes. And the changes aren't only from the climate effects that they experience, but it's also that the world is going to have to change. If the world survives, it means we have to get off carbon. We have to move to a zero carbon emissions economy. And that means that there'll be big changes in how we travel, how we buy, what we eat, eating less meat, eating more local food, buying less stuff in general. There are going to be a lot of changes they're going to see, the way in which we work, what sort of industries there will be. All of those things are going to change. So we need to be thinking about how we can prepare our children to be able to adapt and cope with all those changes, both emotionally and in terms of their skills and competencies.
How difficult is it to address this topic when, as you had mentioned, it's become a political issue? In some cases, people will say, that doesn't exist.
It certainly is difficult when there are still the climate deniers around. I think the evidence is very clear-cut. The certainty about climate change is greater than the certainty about the link between smoking and lung cancer. We really do understand it. There's very documented evidence of the increase in carbon dioxide in the world. We know how the greenhouse effect works, about trapping the carbon dioxide and other gases, trapping the heat around the Earth. We know the temperatures are rising. All these things are happening even faster than the scientists have predicted. Like ocean temperatures have gone up 60% faster than the scientists predicted 30 years ago. So I think it is real, and to have people who are just denying it and pretending it's not there is not helpful for anyone, and particularly not for kids when they're learning the science at school. They do know the science. There's so much material around the science. I don't think there are many kids who are climate deniers. So when those who have authority and who are making the decisions about what the future world will be like, acting as if it's not happening, is actually very disempowering for children, and it's increasing their levels of anger and frustration, and makes them feel, what's the point? If nobody's going to work to create a world for me for the future, if there won't be a livable planet, what's the point? And that sort of nihilistic feeling isn't what we want to be promoting in our children.